So I understand that we didn't have too much time for questions, so Ainslie's going to come up here too on the panel. So we'll integrate you in. So my name's Michael May. I'm the CEO of the CCRM. And Jonathan presented from the CCRM, but it's a center that sources IP, builds companies, and then supports those companies with kind of gap-filling infrastructure like manufacturing, et cetera. So in the business of creating companies. And today we have a panel where everyone here has kind of leveraged their scientific background into business. And so this gives you the opportunity to ask them some questions, but the theme of the panel is about business planning, kind of how do we encapsulate all of these opportunities into business planning. You know, Jonathan mentioned that this is really the hottest sector in biotech, cell and gene therapy, and a lot of that is being driven by efficacy data in the cellular immunotherapy. And so for the first time, we have strong efficacy. And now we have the first reimbursements in the space and the first regulatory approvals and a lot of effort in manufacturing. So a real industry is now evolving around cell and gene therapy. What's also interesting is that countries like Japan and even the United States now are evolving their regulatory policies to accommodate these unique products. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the space built around that efficacy, and ultimately that is resulting in these regulatory changes, but also all the financings and the investments in the field that Jonathan talked about. So you have everyone's bios in your paper, but I wanted everyone, I'm going to put you on the spot so you can go last. I'm just wondering if everyone could introduce themselves briefly, but tell us something that we wouldn't be in your bio, because a lot of your success is driven by your personalities and your personal experiences. So, Julia, you can start. Please say your name. You've been introduced, but tell us something about yourself.
Okay. So I have 2 children. I have a 4-year-old son. This is my other big passion in life, besides career and trying to cure cancer. I have a 4-year-old son. He started school last week, and my 2-year-old daughter just had her 2nd birthday yesterday. So that's the family bit. The other part I wanted to share is understanding your why, and so my why for what I do and what I'm passionate about. And so family, obviously, but my other passion is really creating something out of nothing. And so, the concept of participating in this startup at Turnstone, it's actually the 3rd example in my career, although short, where I've created something from nothing, was able to build something. And so that's what really drives me, and that's what I'm really passionate about.
So the next person is Milica Radisic, who's a professor at U of T. Now, we haven't met you yet today. So Milica, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Okay. So I'm a prof at the University of Toronto. I'm in IBBME and in chemical engineering. I'm also associate chair for research in chemical engineering. I run and create a training program in entrepreneurship and organ-on-a-chip engineering, and also a CFI-funded Center for Organ-on-a-Chip Engineering, and I'm also a senior scientist at the Toronto General Research Institute. And I should say I am also passionate about both career and family. I have 3 kids. My kids are bigger, 16, 13, and 10. And I'm particularly interested in how to help our young ladies excel in careers, because I think we have kind of subconscious biases inside us that are keeping us from succeeding.
And I hope we touch on that a little bit later. Some of your thoughts on that. Frederic.
Fred Sweeney. I'm 3 things about me. Well, I'll talk about my kids. Just kidding. Very proud. 3.5-year-old and a 5-month-old. So I'm half tired because of Versant and half tired because of my 5-month-old who doesn't sleep. The second thing is I was Dan DeRoche's first student. So that's a little fun fact. He was the founder of Repair Therapeutics. Lots of drinking stories with Dan before he was a big shot. So if you want some juicy gossip, come talk to me. And the third thing, on a more serious note, is I think when you reflect on your career, Obviously, nothing was ever planned in my career. I think it was a mix of a couple of things. It was a mix of insatiable ambition, I think, and like naivete. Really, I was like so naive about how hard it was that I just kept going. So I think that was like the perfect storm of inexperience that made me kind of be where I am today. So that's kind of my reflection on my career.
Which makes a trainee or a postdoc or a PhD student perfect for entrepreneurship.
Well, absolutely. That is my thank you. You just like I loved you one. You just like knocked it out of the park. But yes, it's true.
So another thing, Frederic mentioned 3 things. One of my pieces of advice is always tell your story in 3s. 3s or 5s, never even numbers. No one remembers them. So I'm really impressed that you came up with 3. Although hopefully not everyone will have to go through 3. But,
yeah, I likely won't have 3 things to say. So yeah, Jonathan Ye. I guess I could talk about my kids as well. I have a daughter that's 1.5 years old and a son that is gestational day. I've lost count right now, but he's coming soon, which has me really kind of scared right now. If I kind of think about one thing that wasn't in my bio, I do have an MBA. I did talk a lot about finance. I would say that finance is probably my worst subject. It's not something that I find natural. I just have to work at it and always educate myself and make sure that that I'm up to speed so that I can get it. Maybe I do have 3 things actually. The third thing would be that throughout my career I actually have tried several or a few startups which have ultimately failed. They've never really launched. One of them was a medical device startup that was looking at a way of better putting in the IM nail during surgeries. Another one was a more of a service type one, and they never really took off. But I just kind of kept plugging away and looking for opportunities and still looking for a startup opportunity.
it's fascinating in the world how failures are perceived. And in different cultures, and it's nice in Canada that we can be allowed to failure and it can be leveraged into success. So that's wonderful. Ainslie.
All right, I will round it out. I have 2 boys. They are 8 and 3.5, and they're both going to be very giant people when they grow up. They do not get that from me. 2, the first time I learned about patent law and being a patent agent as a career when I was a postdoc, and my husband went to an entrepreneurship boot camp. And he came home one day and he said, I learned about this cool career option. It's IP, you do this and this and this and that. And I looked at him and I said, that sounds terrible. But if we want to do it, go for it. Turns out he had no interest. I would find myself doing that and loving it. So, and I've got to give you a third now. There's pressure for that. The really rewarding thing for me has been in this career and now where I've landed at Bluerock is that every single day since I started in this field, I've learned something new. And it might be new technology, it might be a new aspect of my client's business or a new aspect of Bluerock's business. Every single day I have to do something that I've never done before, and every single day I learn something new, and it's really like, what a fortunate position to be in, to be able to have somebody pay me to do that, right? So that's me.
Exciting. So I want this to be interactive. So if you have a question in the audience, it'd be great if you went up to the microphone, but if you want to put up your hand, I'll come over with the mic. But just before we start, I want to get a sense of who's in the audience here. So, is everyone here scientists of some form or other with a scientific background? Yeah, put up your hand. Yeah. Anyone in the audience have a discovery that they feel has an opportunity to be translated or get to the market? Anyone working on something like that? So So a few people, that's about the right number. Just is there anyone out there who could throw out kind of what you want to learn from these guys in this panel? And I might walk around and ask people, so make sure I want 3 things that people are going to want to get out of this. Someone has to throw that out. Doesn't have to be articulate. We're talking about business planning and putting everything they said together into a plan. Anybody? Yeah, back there, yell it out.
I'm curious about their journey from being very lab scientists to where they are now, generally speaking, more managerial and playing very different roles in the field. So I'm curious about that journey from the lab.
Yeah, it's a great question. Transitioning from that scientific background to the business side. Something else? Yeah.
I'm kind of the odd one out, but I was curious about the differences between drugs that were commercialized versus actual biologics. I know this is supposed to be about biologics. I'm on the other side, so.
All right. Well, technical. We can get to that. Very, very interesting. And it's interesting that the regulatory policies are actually changing, so that some of those legislated divisions are actually dissolving away because there's so many combination products. Any other one? We need one more. Yep.
I'd love to hear about the difference between medical devices and biotherapeutics, biologics. You touched on that, but maybe just learning more about that and what a business plan, the strategy might look like.
Okay, so we'll tackle that, maybe the difference between the pathways by these different groups. So thanks very much for doing that. Remember, you can ask a question anytime. So Julia, I wanted to start with you because you talked about everyone talked about technical things today, but we chatted a little bit about the importance of the networks we build. And you mentioned that to me earlier, and I thought you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Be glad to. I think networking, I hope, is a common theme throughout all of our stories. It's certainly the reason why I've been here today. I do want to share one story because I think it's relevant for where you're sitting today. So I was a PhD student, and I was attending every seminar that existed that had to do with entrepreneurship. And the University of Ottawa put on a seminar series, and every month they brought in a different entrepreneur, and they would just tell us their story and how they came to be. And I made a point after every conference or every talk to introduce myself, to get their business card, and ask them if I could reach out to them. And some of you might do that today, but I actually did. So I followed up, and I say that because I tell this at every talk, that it's really important to network and follow up, and it's hard, but it pays off. And so I followed up with each of them, took them each out to lunch, which I paid for since I invited them, and just picked their brain and asked for advice. I didn't know necessarily what I wanted to do, but because of family situation, I did want to stay in Ottawa. I didn't have the opportunity to move to California or Boston to do the biotech thing. So I was trying to be very opportunistic about creating opportunity for myself. One of them I really connected with, and he was trying to start another startup. This was his 3rd attempt. And I just said, can I volunteer as an intern and just learn? He wanted to write business plans, and I had never done that before. And he thought I was crazy, but obviously accepted, because he needed to communicate the science part of it in the business plan, and that's something as a PhD student I could do for him. So we collaborated and went to his house, his home office, and helped him craft business plans, more or less for free. And that story sort of ends quickly because he wasn't able to raise the money. But he became a key part of my network. And when I was on maternity leave with my son, the first baby, the Turnstone project had come to fruition, so the trial was launched, but Turnstone hadn't been founded yet. So my career was sort of uncertain, and so I was trying to create opportunity. And one thing you can do easily from anywhere is writing. And so I started my own consulting company when I was home with my son on maternity leave. And I started by networking with this guy. He was a doctor, an MD, and he had worked in several large pharmaceutical companies while trying to do his startup thing on the side. And so through him, he connected me to all sorts of pharmaceutical companies. And before I knew it, I had more clients reaching out to me to write. I was ghostwriting papers and attending conferences in the field and doing the minutes and publishing them. all ghostwriting, but for a very, very hefty fee. And so I, without even trying almost, created this company. And it turns out medical writing or ghostwriting is not something I'm passionate about. It was a means to an end. I made a lot of money rather quickly. And when Turnstone came to fruition and I got hired, I didn't need the backup plan. But I obviously still stay in contact with him and continue to build my network and continue to have plan B, C, D, E, and F, because that's just the type of person I am. But networking will certainly be the key, I can guarantee, to your success going forward.
So one of the things you want to do is find mentors that are highly networked. And maybe the panel, we can move along the panel, and maybe you can talk about any mentors that you've had in your career that have helped you along the way. And then Milica, I think this is a nice segue into trying to kind of support and enhance careers for women, especially in business and science. But maybe talk about your mentors and then the rest of you as well, because I think it's really important.
So I'll just say one thing that is, I think, important. We always tell people you have to find mentors. And so who are mentors? And it's not necessarily a formal role. There is like they could be, and it's really good if they're your professor, if you're doing PhD or master's or postdoc. It's really important that you have a good relationship with your supervisor, and that they are somebody who views their trainee success as an important thing. And so there are some people who will, they'll think of themselves as successful if their trainees succeed. So it's important to find those people if you can and ask around and talk to the trainees of those professors to make sure that they have that kind of attitude. But mentor can be anybody, and it could even be very informal relationships, somebody that you see maybe once a month, or you talk to them once a month, or even once in 2 months, but they have to be at the right position and to have enough experience to kind of guide you, right? It doesn't have to be something involved. You see somebody every week or so, and find mentors for different things, right? It's not going to be one mentor, but you will find mentors for different things. I certainly asked a lot of questions when I was starting on, and I still ask a lot of questions. Mentors don't have to be older than you. They can be younger than you or your age, and as long as they've done something that you haven't done. And so I always ask people, within like University of Toronto settings, sometimes I would ask Mike Sefton, how do you do something? And then he would say, in a big system like this, you can bend the rules, don't break them, but it's easy to bend the rules. Or Doug Reeve would say, he was chair of chemical engineering, his view of a big system like U of T or UHN is it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. I'm quoting Doug Reeve. And so things like that, right? And just ask people how to do things. Most people, unless they have borderline personality disorder, they'll tell you their honest opinion. They won't deceive you. You don't have to be close friends with them, but they will answer the question honestly. If you ask them, let's say, how you did something, or what do you think about this, they'll give you their honest view. And so from that point of view, you can rely on the advice.
So Frederic and Jonathan, any examples of mentors that help?
Yeah, I have a few. I think one of the things and I violently agree with you guys. I mean, you cannot never network enough. Other thing to keep in mind too is never burn bridges. It's a very small world, and when you say you follow up. I guarantee you that we're going to have 1 or 2 follow-ups from these meetings, not more, because that's always a sniff test. He's like, "Oh, great to meet you. Here's my card. Follow up with me." If you don't follow up, then what's the incentive I have to help you out? And then you'll find someone, for some reason, who just wants to help you. And you won't understand why me, but you just connect, right? And for me, just a personal, a little bit sentimental, but personal experience is when I joined Vengrowth, I joined a venture capital fund right after graduate school. I knew nothing about finance. And this guy took me literally under his wing, was Jeff Courtney. And Jeff became My biggest mentor and one of my closest friends founded Turnstone as part of the investment and recently passed away. But it was my dearest, closest mentor, and so that's you go beyond just a mentorship to develop really, really strong friendships. So
yeah, great example. Jonathan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition to what's already been said, I think you really have to be sort of introspective when you're looking for a mentor and really try to figure out where are those gaps in your own sort of development or where do you want to grow out to in terms of trying to find that mentor. I've always had entrepreneurial sort of ambitions and characteristics, but always working within the confines of a company. And that's not necessarily the best situation because there are certain processes that you need to follow within a company, and you're always trying to figure out ways to break those when you're in there. So I had tried to harness that by learning about something called entrepreneurship, and I found a book which I read, and it really kind of spoke to me. And I reached out to the author, asking him if I could, speak to him more. And we stay in contact today, and I regard him as a mentor in trying to, harness my sort of characteristics, but within a corporate structure, and trying to build, new things within a company.
Ainslie? Besides your husband, who inspired you to go into IP law?
Tell him that. I've been involved in a few formal mentorship programs, and those in general, I would say, have never actually resulted in a strong mentor relationship for me. So I have fallen into them, but I've certainly had a few very important mentors, both in my legal and scientific careers. And I think the shocking thing for me was, these people they really wanted to help me. And I don't know why they wanted to help me, but they did. And so for me, I recognize that, and I've always found it very important to show my thanks to those people because they really, really have made an impact on my career. So about once a year, I make sure I send like a real deal. Thanks, here's where I'm at right now, and you really helped me have the opportunities to do all of this. So I guess I would suggest when you find those people and you'll find those people who just want to help you, make sure you value them.
Yeah, because building a network is one thing, keeping it sustainable is another. So you have to follow up, you have to put some effort into it. Have any of you ever volunteered as part of your career development and that? Volunteering is one way to build a network where there's trust built into it and you meet people that you could never meet otherwise. So I always think if you have a chance to volunteer outside of, within your industry or your area of interest, it's great benefit. Look, we want to talk a little bit about the business planning, and then some of the unique features of it. But if these relationships don't happen, and you don't have mentors, and you don't have help, business planning is very, very challenging because it really embodies relationships. A quick question for the panel here. In your experience with business planning or working with those that have, is there a template? There are lots of books in the store that say how to write a business plan. I think I started that way years ago. But Jonathan, is there a template for a business plan, or what are we doing there?
I don't think that there's necessarily a template. You sort of need to figure out what the opportunity is, and it really goes according to that. I'm a little bit formulaic with the way that I do things because I'm a very process-oriented person, and I always see 4 main sections in a business plan. One section is the external factors. You're looking at the market, but you're looking at why is this the time? Why is everything right now for your technology to enter in there? You're looking at the market, you're looking at competition, you're looking at regulatory, all of those external factors. Then you need to look internally. What are your core competencies? Management team, in your own skill set. And then you bring those together and you need to craft out what that opportunity is. And I think the financials really come out to that. You really need to speak to the people that you're pitching to and what do they want to see in terms of the opportunity. And then the last section, which not a lot of people include in business plans, actually is talking about the risks and mitigation of those. And I think it's very, very easy to be overly optimistic and say like everything is great, it's $1 billion company, we're going to change the world. But then when you can really, really become introspective and identify what the key risks are that are facing the enterprise going forward, and then what is your plan to mitigate those risks, then I think that you can really eliminate some of that uncertainty that I talked about.
So, Frederic, you've seen hundreds, maybe thousands of business plans. Give us your impression of the good business plan.
Well, number one, I never read. I never read them.
You never read them? Okay, well,
you're never going to go read a business plan from start to finish. I think, in my humble opinion, the value of the business plan is not the product, but it's the exercise, right? You will know when you talk to someone that person has put together a real business plan and have sat down for hours thinking about exactly what Jonathan is saying, all the risks, external, internal. You're not going to critique page 63, third line of your business plan. There's some key components, financials, the IP, all that stuff, which is important. But I think the exercise is extremely important to do. The decisions will not be made on the business plan. The decision is going to be made on that money slide that you present. And the last thing I'll say is sending your business plan to investment@info.versant.com probably is not going to work out.
Tell us why. I think this is
it's very important. It's actually a little bit like the network thing, right? You'll always get your best jobs not by applying to the job, but having someone reach out to you because they need someone, and someone like you. Mm-hmm. In the investment, again, in my humble opinion, it's exactly the same thing. You'll start talking and developing this relationship for months, if not years, before you really get a great investor on board that's going to help you. And that's not going to come by sending your business plan to a link on the website. These relationships, as we all know, are extremely important.
Yeah, this is a really important point. So Julia, talk a little bit about the business plan really as the pitch and a tool for that, as opposed to all the details necessarily that are in there.
Sure. I just wanted to add a comment that I've never applied for a job in my life. Every job I've ever had, even as a 15-year-old, was through relationships and creating opportunity. So it's a good sort of vignette. Turnstone, we're big on PowerPoint slides, and so I've never actually seen a business plan. I'm not, the MBA at Turnstone. But I have been part of building out slides, and we actually call it the money slide. And we've refined slide decks and pitches and pitch decks from, probably been 100 of these types of meetings where you're just going in front of them over and over and over again. And so just can't emphasize enough how important it is to succinctly and simply as possible articulate what you're offering. And so the pitch isn't just in visual format PowerPoint slide deck, it's also in every conversation you have, in every interaction. So if you're part of a company, you're 8 people for a year trying to raise money, any opportunity I had to talk about Turnstone, whether they call it like the elevator pitch, make sure you can describe your company and what you do in 30 seconds. Challenge yourself to practice that. What does it look like to pitch what I'm doing in 30 seconds? Some of the people you're in front of, you may not have a lot of their time. So intrigue them in a very short period of time. Not sure I can add much more.
No, that's great. And business plans can come in the form of PowerPoint presentations. It doesn't have to be 100 pages of. Actually, those are probably not all that successful. Those 100-page business plans. So Milica, so it's a pitch, and it has to have all the elements to it. Maybe comment a little bit about the unique challenges of a woman in the industry making that pitch or advancing, if you wouldn't mind, because I think it's important to talk about it.
Well, so I think in general, something that's deeply ingrained in our culture is that, and women and men both do this, you trust women less than you trust men. And if you do, or like, let's say, subconscious training bias that CHR has, and they're also, from Harvard Business School, you can find these modules, then you're surprised when you learn your own biases. That in general, like in our society, I think the society trusts men at the helm more than women at the helm. And so there is this whole new challenge. So how do you convince people to trust you? So you have to, have very, very confident self-appearance. However, it doesn't mean you're that confident on the inside. What's on the inside doesn't matter, but it matters what do you project, right? So I remember when I interviewed for my job at U of T, and I haven't even defended my PhD when Mike invited me to give a job talk. And then we, like several of us, we just practiced job talks in front of one another. And after my interview, Mike told Gordana, who is my big mentor, she's a prof at the university, Mike said, "Oh, I've never seen such confidence in my life." And Gordana just laughed. She said, yeah, sure. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is, really, how do you bring the team together and how do you manage people if you're a woman? I think the set of tools that you have are very different than what a man has. So basically, a male PI, a male CEO, a male founder can just be very stern and tell people to work, and even you use harsh language. If you try to do that as a woman, you really come across as somebody who's super aggressive. Nobody likes you. Nobody wants to work with you. And so then the question is, how do you, get people to do something that you want done? And I think Sheryl Sandberg has written a good book about it, Lean In, how to deal with these things. She says one good strategy is just say, let's say I could say, Mike Sefton suggested that I should do this. Like, Mike Sefton suggested that I should ask you.
So you use your network and mentors as well.
Yeah, you use your network. So that's one way to do it. And just try to be nice in general.
So one of the nice things about this field is that it's, in the life sciences, it's very balanced as you head towards the top. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of opportunities for that leadership. Did you have any comments on being a woman in the space? Or
Sure. When I was a postdoc, my postdoc was actually funded 50% by the Women in Science program at University of Wisconsin in Madison. So there we worked on a project in particular to teach new profs how to run and manage labs, because they're effectively running a business, right? And in particular, we trained them to work with a diversity of people and to recognize all these unconscious biases and things like that. For me, one of those mentors I had, her name is Jean Baker, she really took me under her wing when I was at the law firm. And early on, she said to me, Ainslie, you are young, you are small, you need to wear a suit. You need to wear a suit for people to take you seriously, because I was in the legal profession. But I took that to heart because people, that's your first appearance, and that's how people recognize you. And I am also not quite 5'3". I have a large rack of high-heeled shoes under my desk, which everybody mocks me about. But man, when I go into a big meeting, I am wearing those high-heeled shoes, and I walk in with confidence. The other thing I will note, in terms of being a woman in this field or in business and trying to progress your career, is to consider how you're supporting other women in particular. Because one of these subconscious biases is that women are often harder on other women than they are on men. And I always try to be aware of that, and I try to make an extra effort to support the young women that I'm working with and to help them build up their confidence.
So that's one important example of a hurdle in the space. But Frederic, I want you to go back to your time being this naive, ambitious young person.
That's why I met you for the first time.
That's right. We were probably in the same stage, being bold and naive at the same time. But how did you work through that hurdle?
Oh boy.
without any gray hair, which you have a lot of now, and no hair for me. How did you work through that?
Oh boy.
Because you had something to pitch at the time, right?
Well, so I make a very long story short. I was kind of in the 2005. This was kind of the 2005, 2006. Mars was just getting kind of up and running, and they had these Entrepreneurship 101 course. I don't know if you remember those. I don't know if they still exist, but I had kind of helped Tony Redpath kind of organize them. That's a good way to meet people, and really, like Julia, I wanted to volunteer. Like Dan was, generous enough to say, look, you've done a decent PhD, you can do stuff on the side. So I network, and I found a job in a small boutique bank. It was called SHI Capital at the time, and that's how my pitch to them was, hey, I know the science. They were looking to fund business plans that were scientific, and I'll just learn the business on the side. But the real value was also getting the network, because the role of this little boutique bank was to connect with all these investors. And next thing you know, I was going to investor conference, and a year after that, that's where I met Luke at Bangrowth, and they just happened to look for a junior associate to replace a much more the junior analyst to replace a senior associate. So I was really a cost-cutting measure. But I was there at the right time, the right network, and I took the opportunity. So there was absolutely zero planning in all of that. It's just, again,
just walking through a door.
Just hustling.
Yeah, hustling. So Jonathan, I'm looking at the time. I want to make sure we address, and there's no question from the audience yet. So, okay, go ahead. Oh, sorry, there's two here. Oh, yeah. If you can come to the mic, then it'll be recorded. Can you do that? Can you come up? Right up. You got to come up to the mic if you wouldn't mind.
I was wondering, how do you, like, IP, is it something you can learn from, like, diplomas, or is it something that you learn by yourself? Like, for example, IP, like business plan and stuff like that. Is it something you learn by yourself, or something you can learn, like, workshops?
Yeah, go ahead on
So this is I hate giving this answer, because if you're interested in a career in IP, really the toughest thing is getting your foot in the door, because there's not an easily accessible training system for this. You can go to law school, you can do courses in IP. If you're at a university or a hospital affiliated with the university, you have a tech transfer office, you can go to them and ask how you may become involved and learn more. Some people do internships in those offices. And I always suggest that getting some practical experience, that's how you become more marketable. If you're in a company, and if you move into a company, there's always room to move about, right? And you can express an interest in IP, and then maybe you can become involved. I certainly would be receptive to that from one of my colleagues. But in Canada in particular, you have to be supervised by an IP professional for 2 years before you're even eligible to write exams to become a patent. That's not the case in the U.S. So I think the clearest route is through the tech transfer office. There's also a set of courses at McGill that are offered in the summer that are intro to IP. And this morning, one of those videos that was shown, that was by the Association of University Tech Transfer Managers. Autumn has a series of webinars to teach you about IP, and they have an annual meeting in which there are courses and a bunch of panels on specific IP issues, and I think that's a really great learning opportunity, and they have a few grants for students, travel grants.
You sit down, you write a patent, and then when you get the response from the patent reviewers, that'll teach you a lot.
It's true, that's true.
So, I don't know, is that experience, I mean, going through the process is really important. Did you have a question?
Sure.
Oh, okay, go ahead, please.
So this is a little off topic, but something that, based on what John had, just a little tidbit on his slide, is something that I'm interested in as well, and that's AI. So there's a lot of funding in Ontario and Canada, both for stem cell and regenerative medicine research, but also with AI. And I'm kind of curious about the intersection between and I know there's a couple of companies started out of Toronto and Montreal as well, kind of pairing the two. You gave the example of AI for drug discovery, but I would imagine that it would apply to kind of everyone here. My question, I guess, then is, do any of you buy it that AI will kind of advance what you're doing in your industry?
Jonathan?
So I think that there is a lot of hype with AI for sure, and with that hype, you get a lot of stuff that's not going to pan out. But I do think that there is a basis that hype is based on, which I think will make a difference in our industry for sure, in cell and gene therapies. I think it's when you're looking at anything that's able to better predict and give you better predictive powers based on not just like one or two variables, but a whole multitude of variables, and incorporating things that are both discrete and sort of like unrefined sources of data. If you're able to kind of put all that together and predict, then you're looking at ways to better mitigate risk. And when you can do that, then I definitely think that you're going to see AI penetrating into this space.
Great. Any other comments on that? So we had a question about medical devices versus biologics versus drugs. So I want to kind of throw to the panel, from a business planning perspective, and with those different products, what really is the what do you have to think about in kind of taking those different products to market, and ultimately what's the end game for those different products? So anyone want to talk about that, Frederic?
Well, I can talk about the diagnostic quite a bit, because I spent most of my career actually in diagnostic. I mean, it's really, like I was saying earlier, it's biotech and medical device diagnostics. It's really two different worlds from an investor standpoint. The risk, and to make a long story short, the risk profile, I think, is really different. So if you look at biotech, whether it's biologics, the risk profile is really around the patient, the science, the clinic, everything that happens before commercialization. If you think about diagnostics, it's really the opposite, right? The risk profile is really around, oh, great, now you have an FDA-approved test that's faster than any, so what, right? How are people going to buy it? How are they going to get reimbursed for it? And then we've seen that bioMérieux is a $10 billion company, so it's a really large company specialized only in diagnostic. And we used to have a tremendous budget, what we call market access studies. So it's once your test is approved, you have to run all of these trials continuously, right? We had a marker called procalcitonin, which reached peak sales 12 years after FDA approval, after 1,200 publication, right? It's a different. So when you think about medical device, diagnostic most precisely is, you really have to keep that in mind. And investors actually nowadays are shying away quite a bit from medical device and diagnostic, because the turnover of return in the biotech is so attractive right now.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback on that comment and really just say that the key difference, again, going back to risk, it seems like that's all I talk about, is with biotech, the risk is really up front. It's the technology risk. It's whether it's going to pass in the clinical trials. But once it passes those clinical trials, there's a clear path, and you're going to have an impact on patients, and you know that it's going to probably be a success. How much of a success is up for debate, but it will still be a success. With the medical device and definitely diagnostics, it's really a lot of the risk is in the late stage, and it's like Fred said. A lot of the how is your business operation running? How are you able to kind of penetrate in there and kind of get key partnerships and actually get your tests purchased by physicians and used by different groups. So I think that when you look at the two that way, definitely having a lot of the risk in the back end makes it less attractive to certain investors. And then with biotech right now, certainly we're seeing a lot of high returns, for and sort of at a shorter window. So I think a lot more money is going there right now.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, come on up to the mic, please.
question is more of plastic. I actually want to ask you because the panel has most of the members who have transitioned into the business plan, and you're the only member who has one foot still in the academics. So I just wanted to know if your business plan was something that you started to branch out your own work, or if it's two different entities, and for the rest of the panel members, if this was a conscious choice for better opportunities.
Well, it's definitely something that comes out of our research, and it is not a bad position to be in if you're running your own lab and you have your own research program, and if you are asking good questions. You can do a lot of development on government money, so essentially on grants, right? So let's say, just a practical example, the heart tissue for drug testing that we commercialized, we probably put in 5-6 years worth of work in it before we ask for money. Developing the platform, testing, publishing, and you do all of that on grants if you can raise money, right? And then together with my students, we started this company. If you were just doing this out of your garage, you don't have a lab, it's difficult, right? How are you going to do it? For bio, it is hard because you have to do experiments. It's not like computer science or AI where you have a good idea and you can do it with, by outsourcing some of the coding work to other programmers. So I don't think that's a bad position to be in, and it almost like I feel like we are incentivized by the system to try, and we also have like ethical obligation to try. Because if you don't try to commercialize, then everything that we discover just stays in the lab, right? There is really never a true benefit to society. So if you have an academic, a scientist or PhD student or postdoc, they're commercializing and they fail, I don't think it should be viewed as a negative. I think they've done their duty to the society because, all of the taxpayers' money that we spent on grants, at least you can try to commercialize so that the public can benefit from this instead of just read papers.
Julie, do you have anything to add to that? And even about obviously everything's founded on great science, but transitioning that scientific story to the money slide or the other parts of the plan.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. I hope I didn't give you the impression that the day the idea came to be ready for translation was the day, like in 2012. John Bell and the scientific founders have been working on oncolytic virus technology for 2 decades, trying to find something worthy of translating. Years and years of experience and publications. And so knowing when you're ready, that's one key piece, is when you have convinced yourself and you're the best judge that there's nothing better. It is worthy of getting to the patients. And then I love the sentiment that it is our duty. And so John Bell is very much passionate about that's his dream. And this is, very much their company. Although I was there to see it come to fruition, they're the founders. And their dream was to get cancer therapies to patients as quickly as possible, and not just one, but a suite of them. And I think we're realizing that dream right now, which is fantastic.
There were some other questions, so come on up to the mic, and then 2 more questions probably we have time for. Go ahead.
Thank you, guys. So Canadian research industry has some academic, at least the academic side has great researchers, as you know. There are people, on the other hand, or investors have deep pockets, we have great money, but I feel that when you start a company, or when people start a company, they face this difficulty of getting the money. It's not as easy to get the money, even from the granting agencies to the development work, especially. It's been really, really difficult. And with BioCanRx, for example, they have a small pocket, they can give you some money to start up something. But there's definitely a disconnect between the academia and the investors to translate the research done in the lab to be commercialized. And John Bell is a great example, but I don't think many academic people in academia are not able to do the way he has done. It's very difficult. Do you think there is something lacking that you you could kind of point out or give tips on that, probably not the tech transfer people, or at least the university or academia should think about in terms of making this process easy for them?
It'll never be easy. But anyone want to comment on getting the money?
Well, I can speak a little bit on. Sorry, you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Maybe a little bit on behalf of Versant. It should never be easy. And remember that you see, for every project that's funded, you know, a venture capitalist will see 50 to 100 projects, right? So I think the biggest gap, and we see this as an opportunity actually, is, and well, that's one of the reasons that Versant is doing a big push in Canada. The fundamental science in Canada is second to none. It's at par with the big centers in the U.S., East Coast, West Coast, name it, in Europe. There's actually a tremendous gap in company creation, both from a funding perspective and an experience perspective. So I think Versant, saw that as an opportunity because we're company creators. So really develop the relationship with the academic, and fund these company creations. One of the challenges that we have is actually to recruit people that have done it before, successfully or not. Doesn't really, hopefully successfully at least once, but with a few failures. But it's a really big challenge to recruit people back to Canada because where the action is in biotech is in the Boston and California area. So we're really trying to break that vicious cycle, and hopefully we're chipping it a little bit at a time. But to answer your question specifically, I think also that one of the big gap is because of that lack of experience. The folks are not necessarily wired to think about doing research in a very commercially oriented way. So you see even a bigger gap, for instance, what's coming out of academia in the US versus what's coming out of the Canadian in Canada. The Canadian definition of what's ready for the clinic is way overinflated because I think there's not this kind of maturity of experience of seeing how really to prepare your package. So it's a bunch of different things, but I think it circles back to the lack of experience in successful biotech bred in Canada.
So it's not just about the technology,
no,
but that experience is really, really important. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to add, because I have experience from both sides of this, raising money to run a research lab and raising money to run a company. What Canada is missing is this middle where you discovered something and you've done studies in mice, and CIHR gave you money, let's say Answer and OC gave you money to discover this thing. You've done mice studies with CIHR. Now you go to Versant. Versant says, oh, I don't have, how about large animal data? And you go like, oh, I don't have it. You go back to CIHR, they say, it's not novel. You already published on this. Why should we give you money to do a pig study? Go ask for money from a company, and then in a matching fund we're going to give you. And you're like, but there is no company that does this. So this middle part is non-existent funding in Canada. Mandate of Answer and OC is not to support this, actually. CIHR tells you it's not novel. And in the US, you can get it from NIH through SDIR, SBIR programs. And I think this is one of the key limitations why we cannot move our science. This gap in the middle of non-existent funding.
Jonathan, did you have a comment on that gap?
Yeah, I was just going to say that at CCRM we definitely identify this gap as well. We call it the Valley of Death. And,
bit of hell. It's a bit of hell, actually.
Bit of hell. Yeah. And it's definitely something that is very real. And part of our sort of goal has been to try to identify different investment vehicles that we can introduce, to help fill this gap. Through other sources, but I completely agree with what Fred said. I think that the lack of the leadership, the lack of of good entrepreneurs and people that know how to do it in Canada is definitely it's a major problem, and that's kind of symptomatic of the of sort of the culture here, which is. Not necessarily doing research, pushing it forward for company spin-out, because entrepreneurship isn't necessarily at that point where it's seen as a viable career choice for a lot of people coming through academia. And things are definitely changing. You guys are all here right now, and things are changing with you. But I think really what the tipping point will be is having corporations like Bluerock and Turnstone, and getting more of these wins, which can then be recycled back into the ecosystem, and then you have those people that have that knowledge in Canada who can then with some capital, who are then going to spread it out to other people, and then spread that knowledge, spread that capital, and then it'll grow from there.
So we had one more question, please.
Hi, sorry, I know I've been asking a lot of questions today. I'm just very eager.
It's your last one.
So I'm in a bit of a unique, frustrating situation where I have a project that I want to commercialize. My supervisor, although, let's just say they are not interested in doing this, but they let me do what I want.
This is recorded, by the way.
That's okay. It's not
He didn't say the
anyway.
name.
No, I'm just kidding.
I don't care. So I was wondering if you guys had any advice, quite frankly, in ways to proceed, either one in getting funding for this, because he's made it very clear that I cannot proceed unless I get funding. Like, he has grants that he could put towards it, but he doesn't want to. So any advice on that? And also potential expertise to help push it, because I'm a PhD student and I'm learning as I go.
Any advice?
Move on. Like leave and start your own company. License the IP, do it yourself.
Go through the door.
Just leave. It's not working.
Well,
Move on.
finish your PhD
Yeah,
first.
finish
Anything else? Any other?
Maybe I'll use that for a little bit of a shameless plug. So we have at Versant we have this structure called Blue Line Bioscience, and you guys are very familiar with it. Although it doesn't solve the problem, Blue Line's mission is really to try to bridge that gap between providing some funding when the idea is really interesting, big ideas, platform ideas, game-changing ideas, to provide some funding to do a little bit of work. Think about it as an extended interview for company formation. Not easy to get, but that is one possible way to do it. And in terms of your advice, it's your PI, man. You just gotta suck it up and just graduate and do your own thing.
To the degree that the PI can help as a mentor, great. Find other mentors. Tell your story. Make your pitch to those that can help you build that network, and build that network among people who have some money or are connected to money, who have done it before. It's a long process, but if you're passionate about it, everybody here has taken that step. Oh yeah, you want to say something? Go ahead.
One piece of advice that I wish had been passed on to us when we were in this position, talking about very similar things and how to get that next piece of funding, was to look at projects you have on the table and know exactly where to trim the fringe projects, right? Know where to focus your energies. You only have so much money, and often if you're part of a larger group, there's going to be little side projects going on. Everyone in academia tends to want to focus on getting towards a degree, but if you need to get the funding, you have to get X, Y, Z done to present that to someone. It's very important to keep focused.
So that's a great segue to the final question for the panel, quickly, is if you could give yourself today advice to yourself 5 or 10 years ago, what would that advice be? I don't know how it starts with that, but someone needs to start. Julia, go ahead.
Yeah, one of key areas that I'm building right now is really leadership. And so when you're head down on the bench, obviously you're just focused, you're so narrow focused. And so if you plan on transitioning away, even if you're a PI, you need leadership training. If you're in a company, even if you don't have direct reports, you're influencing and working in teams, you need leadership training. And I think, at least for me, it was a gap in my education, and it's something that I wished I had worked on more proactively back then.
Lisa?
So Definitely. When I was younger, I was trying to do everything perfectly. Like, I just had this sense of responsibility. I had to do everything. I had to respond every email, and everything. I have to be there for everything. And then the volume of stuff is so high, you can't do it, right? So if I could go back and one advice for a 10-year-old, like 10 years ago, would be not 10-year-old, would be figure out what's important, like the most important things, and prioritize those, and you can cut corners on those other things that are not so important. And because there is only so much time that you have in a day.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah.
Frederic? Gray hair,
tired. No, I think, and that's just a personality thing, but if something, it works in negotiation and science and business, if something is awkward now and you don't talk about it, it's just going to get more awkward down the line, right? Whether you want to negotiate, whether you have a result and you're like, oh man, my PI is really looking for this result, but it's not really the result I have. I'll just brush it off and try to fix it. Just being in front of the problem really saves you a lot of time down the road, and I've made that mistake numerous times. So that's one.
Yeah, great advice. Jonathan?
It's 5 or 10 years ago, right?
Yeah, no more.
Okay, so I probably would have bought Bitcoin. No, if I were to give myself some real advice, I've always kept myself open to opportunities, but I hate to get back to risk again, but I would have taken more risks. Branching out and going it out on your own and being an entrepreneur seems very daunting, but the upside that you can get from it in terms of what you learn is far outweighs anything that you can learn when you're just kind of stuck in a single purpose role. I think a lot of people think that there are things that they know and things that they don't know, and they're afraid of the things that they don't know. But the reality is that there are things that they know and things that they know that they don't know, and things that they don't know that they don't know, and things that they don't know that they do know. And you only learn that when you go out there and really just kind of stick your neck out, and that's when your growth really becomes exponential.
Wow, great. Ainslie?
All right. I was going to suggest dropping perfectionism. That's really important for me too. But I will say, and I think this has come with my gray hairs, which you graciously have not mentioned tonight, is to really listen in whatever interactions you're having with all of these different people, and to avoid the need to react before you listen further. Because when you listen really deeply and you spend less time talking, you can really hear what is important to people that you're talking to and what it is that they need and what they're driving at. And understanding that will be more valuable to you to drive your agenda forward and to meet your goals, I think, than anything else. When I was a teenager, my dad, he would take these long pauses in telling you a story. It drove me insane. We called them like the Bob pause. Dad's Bob. It drove me nuts. I'm like, God, do you not remember we're having a conversation? Like, what are you doing? He was listening, and really always listening and learning all sorts of stuff that other people ran past. So I recommend the Bob pause. Do it all the time.
So we're going to end here. Sorry, Stacy, did you?
What's your advice?
So my advice goes back to something we've talked about, and part of the theme here is that the network you create is much more valuable than the details. And so I would have in the past been much more focused more early on building relationships and building mentors. We all think we have the answers, and in fact, it's a nice segue. Thank you. Right here, we have a lot of experience and a lot of answers. And this is part of your network now. And we are actually going to move to the tables for a Meet the Experts. And really, you should take advantage of the fact that you've now met this panel. They clearly have lots of experience. And that networking, should endure. after today. So maybe we'll end there. Thank you for asking the question, Stacy. We'll end there, and let's thank the panelists for their insights.